Reading out aloud another review of this Doctor Who story, The Mutants. Tim Roll Pickering on the 3rd of the 3rd, 03. Strong analogies, but what about the story? The frustration of the limitations of the Year of Exile format are clear throughout Season 9. There is only one story which is set entirely on present-day-ish Earth, and that story does not feature Unit at all. The rest of the season is taken up either by stories in which the present is interacting with another time period, or with the Doctor being dispatched on yet more missions by the Time Lords. However, The Mutants demonstrates all too clearly the restrictions of such a scenario, whilst also raising questions about the effectiveness of the Time Lords. The Doctor is simply sent a container he has to deliver, with no information whatsoever about the situation he will be stepping into or who he is seeking. Then when the container is finally opened, the information contained within it turns out to be written in an ancient language that hardly anyone can now decipher. If the Time Lords had wanted to ensure that Kai receives the information so much, surely it would have been easier for them to contact him directly or manipulate him and Sondergaard into discovering that truth. This story completely shows up the whole on a mission basis for taking the Doctor away from Earth to be ill-conceived and not thought out through properly. The situation the Doctor and Jo are dispatched to is a poorly disguised parody of the situation in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, where the British realised that they could no longer afford their empire and attempted to give independence to their colonies, but found the local colonial elites fiercely resisting attempts to give independence to the indigenous population, and took this resistance to the point of openly defying Britain and seeking to establish an independent settler regime, sparking off racial tensions which still dominate the headlines to this day. Indeed, from a modern perspective, it is hard not to see parallels between Kai's dispatching of the Marshal and current Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe's current campaign against the white population of the country. There are some discrepancies, though, most obviously Kai's insistence on independence, when in the 1960s the African leaders were emphatic that they wanted no independence before majority African rule. Though the rebellion itself took place in 1965, in 1972 the situation still repeatedly hit the headlines, and so from a contemporary perspective, the story has not missed the boat. Furthermore, the story offers a strong anti-racist message through the revelation that the Solonians are transforming into a wonderful life form, and that their differences do not make them wrong. Unfortunately, the story is let down considerably by its length and execution. It has been given a 6-part slot, but any budget increase that might be presumed to come to a longer story is not obvious, with many of the skybase sets looking cheap and failing to give the impression of a space station, whilst on Solos the location work is dreary and rarely inspires. The acting is generally unimpressive, with both Paul Whitson-Jones, the Marshal, and Garrick Hagon, Kai, failing to bring the depth that these pivotal roles require, whilst George Pravda, Jaeger, gives a performance that is almost a send-up at times. The best performances come from Rick James, Cotton, and Jeffrey Palmer, the administrator, though as the latter is killed in the first episode, this does not bode well for the rest of the story. Both John Pertwee and Katie Manning give competent performances, but this is not one of their best stories. On the writing side, the story becomes too much of a runaround at times as characters pursue one another whilst waiting for the next major part of the plot to come along, whilst the way in which characters are trusted and shift their allegiances all too readily does not make for the best consistency. The direction is also not the best, with a sense of tiredness being evident throughout the production. The result is a story that has been conceived around some extremely strong concepts, which has become of a long tedium by the time it hits the screen, and this is not one of the better Pertwee stories. 4 out of 10.